Thank you very much. First, to those of you in the audience, thank you for taking time away from your cities, from your day jobs, from your families, from your civic responsibilities and everything else to join us this week at the annual convention. And thank you to our esteemed panel for your community service, but also your partnership with local government. I've had the tremendous opportunity during the course of my career to work with all three of these individuals in a variety of capacities. In fact, when we talk about transportation later, Representative Schultz, you and I spent an entire summer on transportation a few years ago, and in fact are still building on a lot of the foundation that was put in place then. As was mentioned, right now we have the opportunity over the next few minutes to hear from state leaders about the massive challenges and opportunities that come from growth from the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. In fact, let's actually start there, Sophia, with you from the governor's office, and thank you for being here. The governor was here yesterday and gave us tremendous comments about growth, but also discussed the investment in trails. There is a significant amount of federal and state infrastructure money that the legislature has appropriated in recent years and that has come through different federal packages. Maybe let's start there. When we think about growth and we think about infrastructure, how do these pieces fit together from the perspective of the governor?
Thank you, and thanks again for the partnership too, and for the collaboration. I know I think, do well working together and are able to accomplish a lot, and that is true for all of the federal funding activity that's happening as well. So much of that is in place, thanks to the great leadership of the legislature, and yes, a lot of that was invested in infrastructure. As you all know, a lot of that is one-time dollars, and so trying to address needs that have accrued over time. The legislature's done a great job in looking at recreational opportunities, not only addressing needs that we have today, but also investments of what the needs will be for tomorrow. So much of that has been in the ARPA dollars that are in motion right now. We have a lot of opportunity with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act as well, and our office is playing a coordination role in that effort. So that is dollars to come, and that's what the opportunity is before us today. And so we look forward to collaborating with all of the partners here on making sure that we're able to be competitive in that. We're anticipating a lot of money coming forward for that, and we'll need to work with the legislature and make sure that there's some strong alignment on how we want to proceed with that. There's also the Inflation Reduction Act that has some opportunities there in terms of energy, and we look forward to working with the legislature on those items as well. But lots to look forward to, and we're in the middle of building some budget recommendations, and we can anticipate a lot of those showing up there in terms of preparing us to be competitive in obtaining some of those funds for Utah.
Terrific. Well, when we talk about federal funds, I think it's important for all of us to recognize how unique Utah really is. We talk about the Utah way, Mayor Ramsey referenced it, but I'm going to give you a specific example of the collaboration that has occurred with the federal dollars that have come to Utah. When Congress passed the CARES Act a few years ago, there was not a dime that was allocated directly to cities and towns in Utah. It was all based on population above 500,000, and the state received a significant amount. And Congress encouraged states to share dollars with local governments, but didn't require it. And there are quite a few states around the country, when I talk to state league directors elsewhere, who didn't see a dime of those CARES Act dollars. In the state of Utah, we had a collaborative partnership with the legislature and with the governor's office, and the Congress had said, you can share up to 45% of this money with your local governments if you choose to, states, and Utah was one of the few states that shared the 45% with local governments. And that's just one example of many where we really do have a tremendous partnership between state and local leaders. And Representative Schultz, speaking of ARPA, you were the reason why we had the local match grant last year. And in many ways, we had to start calling you Mr. Infrastructure because your whole career has been focused in that space. So talk to us about the challenge of growth and the opportunities that infrastructure funding can provide to mitigate some of the negative impacts of growth.
Thanks, Cameron. Can you hear me good? Yeah, I can hear the echo. So, well, first off, thank you, Cameron, for asking the question, because it is such an important question, and it is the biggest thing facing our state and the challenges facing our state. is the growth that we're seeing. Utah's been the fastest growing state in the nation over the last decade. And nobody knows this more than you guys, our local communities. You feel it, you're the front lines of it, and you're seeing it, and you're having to deal with it. You're having to deal with upset citizens when they can't get from point A to point B, and dealing with the infrastructure challenges. And so it's super important, I believe, that we come together as state leaders and local leaders to find solutions to the problems so that we can keep a great quality of life in Utah. I think it's important also to understand maybe some of the reasons why people are coming to Utah. So historically, Utah has been one of the fastest growing states in the nation because of our kids. We have a high birth rate. We have large families in Utah, and those kids grow up and add to our society and add to our economy, and that historically has created a lot of the growth. Well, that's shifted just a little bit since 2020. A lot of the unrest in many of the other states around the nation in the summer of the 2020, and a lot of places, the lawlessness that went on in some of the cities and states, as well as the pandemic, COVID. Utah did a pretty good job managing all of those things in those situations, and there's a lot of families across the nation that looked at Utah and thought that's a great place to live and move. And now with the flexibility of working from home, you're seeing a large influx coming from other states that we haven't necessarily seen in the past. And so it's important that we understand this and we get it right. And you're right, Cameron, the state has worked well with local leaders. Over the last 2 years, we've taken an additional $2 billion and invested it into transportation all across the state, and all modes of transportation, active transportation, roads, and transit. And that's benefit not just the state, but our local communities as well. Another thing is water infrastructure. We took a lot of the ARPA money, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron, but I think it was almost $300 to $500 million that we took and put directly into water infrastructure to help with our drought and to help with our growing needs. And so, and through the local grant program, helped give some of that money back to the communities that need the help as well. And I think one of the things we learned is there's more needs out there than we have money available, and so we need to look to do more of that, I believe.
Well, thank you. It is an unparalleled partnership. When I talk to state league directors around the country, I'm even more grateful that I live and work here. Senator Fillmore, you got a new assignment this summer. The Commission on Housing Affordability has existed for 4 years now, and in fact, on this very stage last year, we had Representative Steve Waldrop present on many of the concepts that later became House Bill 462. Going forward, you're now the Senate, I was about to say Senate representative, but that seems odd. You're now the senator who's the co-chair of the Commission on Housing Affordability. What would you like to see accomplished now that you've been in this role for a few months, and what would you like to see accomplished? What are the challenges you see around housing, and what would you like to see accomplished in the 2023 session around housing?
Thanks, Cameron. I appreciate you inviting me here. It's good to be with you. This is my work outfit, so I'll be going to the bakery after this. Anyway, it's really good to be with you, and I thank you for the question. I'm glad this is on everyone's mind. I think, local elected officials are primarily residents of their city and neighbors of their neighbors. And I think we all have friends and neighbors that have been hurt by this move that we're currently seeing in the housing market, right? I mean, you have children or friends and friends' children that are growing up and trying to buy their first house. How impossible it is. 2 years ago, my best friend decided we're going to move in with my wife's parents, me and our 2.5 kids, and we're going to save up money for a down payment on a house. And I'm sure they saved $100,000 over that time. And the housing costs went up $200,000, right? So it's just, by saving every penny they could, they actually lost ground. And then they bought early this year a fixer-upper in West Riverton for the bargain price of $550,000 in June. Right at the peak, right? That's when I was appointed the co-chair. Housing prices have come down 15% already.
Well done,
yeah.
well done.
And then And then, right, you see this, this correction, right, to solve the unsustainable run-up in housing prices. And I know I'm not the only person who knows somebody in that situation. And so that's just kind of to give context to answer your question. The major problem in housing is that we have a market that is incapable of responding to and preventing this kind of thing that we see, right? We saw it in 2008. We saw it again very recently. It doesn't happen all the time, but whenever there are disruptions, housing is not the kind of market that can respond to those disruptions. And some of those are inherent in the market. It takes a while to build a house, right? Yeah, I can't just manufacture one and get it off my line in a week or two. But like all markets that involve people, it's always a question of everyone is responding to the incentives that the market and the regulatory structure have created. My concern looking at this is that there are too many political and policy incentives that prohibit the free market from responding to spikes in demand. And therefore we see the massive run-up in prices. When that gets to be unsustainable, because the cure to high prices is usually high prices, then we have a massive correction. And so we have people, it's like there's a time people can't afford housing. Finally, they save, they scrimp, they do what they can, they buy housing, and then suddenly the market crashes and they've just lost $50,000 or $60,000 worth of paper equity, right, of their life savings. This will be the largest asset that most people will ever own in their lives. So my approach is going to be to try to restructure the incentives for builders and for local governments to try to make sure that the market can correctly respond to incentives. That's a vague answer to your question. I don't want to take up too much time. You can ask for more specifics if you'd like.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator. And as I mentioned yesterday, we spent a considerable amount of time as a body talking through local land use policy, talking through housing policy. And we do have some good stories to tell in Utah as of late. The housing gap several years ago was at 56,000. Last July, this past July, the Gardner Policy Institute released data showing it was at 31,000. So the gap has shrunk over the last few years. We still have huge affordability challenges, and certainly challenges that Wayne Niederhauser was just describing for deeply affordable and low-income units. And then one thing we've heard from the members too is that the housing challenge looks different whether you're a greenfield community or a redeveloping community or a community off the Wasatch Front. And a lot of this does come back to planning and resources that are available to help prepare for growth. And Sophia, the governor, has been very proactive when it comes to planning and partnering with local governments to plan. So can you talk a little bit about his priorities around planning and some of the partnerships that you're looking to invest in to help local governments on the planning side?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So, first and foremost, it began at the beginning of the administration with the recreation and reconfiguration of the office that I run, the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. We have elevated planning into the budget office and created a planning coordination role. Laura Hansen serves as the managing director of that. And her role is really meant to coordinate all these efforts. There's a lot of planning that has been done over the years and plans that have been put in place, but we need a coordination effort at the state level to make sure that all of that great work is actually put in motion and that we're able to take action in a more direct way and make sure that they're coordinated and that we're all talking to each other. And I think that's worked very well. In fact, I think we have a great relationship with the Association of Governments, and I just want to applaud their effort, but I feel like we're in sync with what they're doing. We want to do more regional thinking, and we know that economic development happens regionally, planning efforts happen regionally. We know there's communities out there, but a lot of these communities are in regions, and we want to do what we can to think regionally. So there's a lot of efforts underway to have some coordinated action plans for water. You can go to our website and find the work that we're doing there around water coordination and also planning coordination. We're working with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity to also revamp some economic development efforts in terms of strategic planning with a planning grant that we received as well. But those are just some examples of things that we're doing to think regionally, but also to elevate you all as leaders. And we know that the work happens locally, and a lot of this needs to be strategic from a regional perspective. And so that's what our focus is going to be. And we're looking forward to elevating those associations of governments as well, and empowering them to do what they need to do to empower all of you.
And we often say within the league, you want to think regionally and act locally. And the partnership with Laura in your office has really been phenomenal. And the legislature deserves a lot of credit for this, for funding technical assistance at record levels. And one thing we heard from our members last year was that we needed to have a statewide conversation with residents about growth, because the poll numbers are stark, the number of Utahns that are frustrated by growth. And the legislature responded with an appropriation. Your office has been leading out on that, and so we appreciate that partnership and that collaboration, so we can really have a conversation with Utahns about what the future looks like.
And if I may just put a plug in for that as well, we're going to have a lot of those dialogue on that conversation about growth, that project, in many different conferences. So we just want to encourage you all to participate in those discussions, because it really is intended to capture your vision and give you the tools to be able to speak with your communities. And so that's my request of the day, is to participate in those conversations as we move forward.
Well, Representative Schultz, I said you were Mr. Infrastructure. I probably should have clarified. You're Mr. Infrastructure, but you're also Mr. Economic Development, because you've been involved in a lot of the conversations at the legislature around the state's economic development strategy and incentives through the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. So talk to us about where you see Utah's economy going, the economic development strategies, and growth challenges and opportunities therein.
Oh, thanks, Cam. I'm really good at following other people's lead. They're much smarter than me. So there has been, and I just want to applaud our governor. He's put some really good, smart people like Sophia in great spots to help lead and make some changes for the better, and not afraid to make tough decisions. And so that's some of the things we need to look at. We need to work collaboratively. We need to think outside the box just a little bit. You mentioned that we've made some changes on economic development last session, and it came through the UEOC. A couple things that we did is we took back and stepped back and said we probably don't need to be incentivizing every business to come to the state of Utah. Let's be a little more strategic about the businesses that we bring into the state and that we incentivize coming into the state. And just a quick example of that, I know of a couple examples last year where the state said, no, we're not going to incentivize distribution centers coming into the state. Well, guess what? They came anyways. And so we didn't need to incentivize that. And I think that's a lesson learned. And we don't have to incentivize every business that comes into the state. There's a lot of businesses that just want to be here. So that's good for the taxpayers. It saves taxpayers money. It's good because we can take some of that money, reinvest in our education, reinvest in transportation and other infrastructures. And there's going to be some businesses that don't come to Utah because we're not going to incentivize them, and that's okay. But what we want to look for is the businesses that come to Utah that give a good multiplier effect. Good high-paying jobs, but also spin off other jobs for low and middle income people as well. So the multiplier effect, get the best bang for our buck. And I think that's where the state's really focused. We worked last year, Cam, with HB 151, with the League of Cities and Towns on retail subsidies and retail incentives. And gratefully, the league worked back with us to rein some of that in. And I think that's better for all of us, because most of the time these things are going to get billed anyways without the incentives. And so it helps your city's budgets. And hopefully it helps basically city shopping in some of these retail areas where they go from city to city saying who's going to give me the biggest incentive, and that's where we're going to locate. We know they're coming. Retail's at Costco is going to come. Some of these other cities, car dealerships, they're going to come. But let's think and be a little more smart and strategic about how we incentivize and who we incentivize. And so, but it does, there are some challenges. I think, two of the biggest challenges, and they kind of go hand in hand. One, the housing crisis. I'll just give you a quick example. from those moving here in Utah, moving to Utah from California, the housing market's actually really good because there's a lot of options. I got a call just yesterday, which I don't get a lot of calls for people looking for houses anymore, but I got a call just yesterday from a real estate agent who has 2 clients coming in from California, cash buyers. They sold their house in California and they're coming to Utah. Well, there's a lot of, they're looking in that $700,000-800,000 range, large lots. But just the week before last week, I got a call from a parent who's about my age. Our kids are growing up and getting married, but their kids are looking to move outside of the state because they can't afford the housing in the state. And so this is one of the biggest problems we're going to face. And if we continue on the trends that we're going to trend, we're going to export our kids and import other people from the state. And so, Cam, you and I have talked a lot about the missing middle. And we need smaller lots and lower priced housing for our kids and our grandkids. And without it, it's forcing our kids into apartments. And that's great for landlords and apartment developers, but it's not good for our society as a whole and for our citizens. And so if we can find a way to work with the state and work with the league and work with our cities and our local governments to provide more options for our kids and more affordable housing, we're going to be better off as a state, and we're going to grow in a smarter way. Dovetail really quick into water. One of the things that I didn't realize until becoming part of the legislature, that almost every ounce of water that we use indoor ends up in the Great Salt Lake. So we turn on our faucets, it goes through the drains, and it ends up going through the sewer systems. And I think right now about 30% of the water that is going into the Great Salt Lake is coming from the sewage treatment plants. And that's a good thing. There's a lot of, and I don't have the time to go into that, but that's actually a really good thing for the lake. But the water that's not making it to the lake is the water that's being used on the outdoor use, water use. And so if we can work to be smarter in how we develop and how we do land use so that we can get more water to the lake, it's going to be a lot better for our kids and our grandkids and for us. That is a big economic development thing. I mean, it's made national news that our Great Salt Lake is drying up, and it is record low levels, and it is a serious issue that we're facing as a state right now that we need to work as a state and with our local leaders to solve the problem.
Well, we have Joel Ferry just off to the stage here who's chomping at the bit to get up and continue that conversation in the next panel. But you're spot on as we think about growth holistically here. There are a lot of tremendous challenges. Senator Fillmore and Representative Schultz touched on the link between housing and economic development. You have witnessed a lot of back and forth and some pretty heated deliberations between me personally and my counterparts in the home builders and realtors industry, but also just all the different stakeholders within the Commission on Housing Affordability. What do you want to make sure that mayors and council members in the audience understand about that back and forth, and maybe even touch on the link with economic development as well?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you making that connection, Mr. Infrastructure. I was reading a book to my daughter, Mr. Tickle. You guys remember those things. This guy has really long arms, right? If you're my age, you read these when you were a kid. After we finished Mr. Tickle, she actually picked up Mr. Economic Development, and it was Mike Schultz's face. Yeah.
Senator Fillmore must have a bill he needs me to get through the House.
Yeah. Okay, so let me recapture my train of thought here. I mentioned in my earlier answer that there's too much disruption in the market, right? And most of that, a lot of that disruption is created by the state legislature. We have historically provided very large incentives for commercial and corporate development, right? We bring businesses here, like we reward them with tax incentives and we bring them here. But we have not provided a compensating incentive on the housing side. So we are subsidizing demand of housing through our economic development incentives while at the same time we are providing disincentives for supply. Another example, the legislature provides that commercial development in any city is taxed at 100% of that commercial property's value, which tends to be higher than residential anyway. And if it's retail, then the city gets 55% or 50% of whatever retail sales are generated at that location. And that's fine. That creates a really big incentive for commercial and corporate development. In the meantime, residential is taxed at only 55% of its lower residential value. So there's a disincentive on the housing side. And that is a market disruption, right? The government has stepped in and said, we're going to disrupt the market to encourage this kind of development and discourage this kind of development. And in that situation, I think there should be no, of course we're going to see housing prices rise higher than commercial property prices, because we're subsidizing commercial property and we're not doing the same thing for residential, right? From a development standpoint. That's something that I'd like to address. We need to make sure that the incentives do not cause housing prices to rise to the unsustainable level where they have been over the last couple of years. There are other parts of that too, right? There's political incentives. Every person on a city council and really every elected official knows it's like when we are responding to the needs and the wishes of those that we represent, there's going to be a lot of pushback to change. And so, changing zoning from agriculture to R5 is going to be a big, heavy lift, and there's political disincentive to make that change. So I want to work to address that. I'm interested in running a bold bill with significant reforms that will actually move the needle on housing affordability. I'm not interested in running a mealy-mouthed bill that makes a tiny tweak here and a tiny tweak there, but does not solve the market disruption that we've historically put in place. We need to make sure that the incentives are there so that the market can respond to demand and remove the disincentives for that. And again, I'll answer more specifics if you have them.
The one thing I'll add is House Bill 462 from last session, I think, is the type of systemic bill that you're referencing, and there's been a lot of discussion within our membership about how House Bill 462 will ultimately make a difference, but we're still very, very much in the infancy of the implementation of that bill. So again, lots of moving parts, but it's important for you as mayors and council members to understand firsthand the type of deliberation that's happening at the Capitol. And that leads to my last series of questions here. And that is, from the perspective of all three of you, and we'll start here with you, Sophia, how can the state and local governments best work together? And by extension, what's your final bit of advice for local government leaders who are on the front lines of growth? What's the bit of advice that you have for them?
Well, first, everyone should know that they have great leadership in you and in your organization, as well as your chair. You guys represent them well on the Hill. I've seen, firsthand the difficult discussions and difficult positions that you're put in with the legislature as we try to make sausage. And we just get to be the implementers and do whatever comes out of those discussions. But first and foremost, everyone needs to know they do have good representation on the Hill. And so I think it's critical that that there's the highest level of collaboration among you all in the room first, that goes into making sure that your leadership it knows where you are. And I think it's hard enough for that consensus to happen locally. I know that all of you have unique challenges, and the more that there's consensus here in the room, the easier it will be for Cameron to do his job when he's representing you on the Hill. But again, we're taking a regional perspective on economic development, on water needs, on everything that's happening in terms of local government. And so the more you can get involved in sharing what your challenges are, sharing your best practices with one another, and thinking in terms of regionally, working very closely with your associations of government. We view those leaders as an extension of us. We view them as part of our team in our office. And the more that they're, the more that you're working with them, that's going to empower you to get what you want. And you kind of heard Senator Fillmore foreshadow some of the difficult conversations that will need to be taking place in the upcoming session. And a lot of that's difficult because we do have to figure out how to solve these issues from a statewide perspective as well. So, at the end of the day, no one's going to be 100% happy, but I know that we're a big, small town in the state of Utah, and the more that we can work together in one direction, even if everybody's unhappy, it might take some of that to make progress for the state as a whole. So collaborate, work very closely with your AOGs, and work closely with Cameron, because he's going to be a great voice for you in this upcoming session.
Thanks. So I learned early on in the legislature that the most powerful special interest is the status quo. It's very easy to argue against a change. Oh, it would be disruptive. We've done it like this forever. I certainly understand that, and I appreciate it. But to answer your question, in the negative, right? Don't just come forward and say, well, the status quo is here. This is what everybody is used to, and therefore we just can't make this kind of change because it will be too disruptive. The housing market, the way that it currently operates in Utah, needs to be disrupted. And maybe to put that in a different way, the disruption that we have for a long time had in the housing market needs to be dialed back. And I recognize that that's going to upset the track that everyone's apple carts in this room are currently on. So what I would look for is really what you've been doing, for the league's benefit. Cameron's been great to work with. And he's right, I've seen him in good meetings, really defending a good position. But I appreciate the fact that as you guys are really coming to the table with an idea towards finding solutions. But I think that there's pretty broad consensus in the public and at the legislature that the status quo is not sustainable, and that we are going to have to make some changes so that the market can work more freely in housing. And as we all recognize that, I'd hope that you at the League would help us understand what kinds of things we can do that will limit the kinds of policy and political-based disruption in the market without being overly disruptive to cities' operations. And anyway, so my message is keep doing what you're doing, right? We've had a good working relationship. You worked well with the subcommittees and the things that we're on in trying to work through and find solutions and being very clear about what's non-starters for the cities and where there's room to negotiate. Those kinds of things are great going in. I would also ask, let's get that work done early and try to build the consensus early. I do not want to be in a committee hearing with a Senate bill numbered in the 200s in the last week of the session, trying to ram through a massive housing reform. Right? Let's work early to get it done.
Well, Cameron, thanks for the questions. First off, I had the opportunity about 2 weeks ago to go with the governor and the speaker and the president on a trade mission to Israel and to Dubai. We looked at a whole bunch of things, but one of the things that the governor and the speaker, president asked me to spend time looking at with the group that I was with was transportation and growth. Both nations and states are growing very fast. There's a lot of similarities that I saw between both Israel and Dubai and Utah, and some of the challenges that they're facing. We sat down with both Israel and Dubai and looked at how they do planning and how they do zoning and different things. Both Israel and Dubai do central planning, and that's done by at the state level government. And if you look at how it's working, it's actually working really well because they're thinking regionally. They're thinking big picture. They're putting density in the areas where density belongs, and they're putting low density in the areas where that belongs. But But you think about bringing that to Utah, and that'd be a terrible idea to have the
Thank you.
state to have the state over land use. And
Did I mention, Representative, that we're filming this session? Just anyway, continue.
it would, and I've thought about it for a long time. It's an industry that I've been in. I've been in front of many city councils for the last 25, 27 years. And I see how you guys do it, and that's truly the best way, I believe, to do it, because you guys know your communities better than anybody else. But I think where the state can play a role is saying, you guys need to look more regionally. When you're looking at how you develop, what you do, where you put things, let's think regionally for the quality of our life. And I'll just give you examples. Where you put the density is super important. Put it next to, as Andrew Gruber was mentioned, next to the front runner stations, next to the track stations, next to the the major roads and those types of things. The way I've heard our governor talk about, think smart in how we develop and how we do it, and think regionally. Don't just look at your individual cities. And so the advice that I would give to the mayors and city council members is going forward is get with like WFRCs and your MPOs. We've provided a lot of money for planning and to help you think regionally in how you develop, where you put it, and what you do. Andrew Gruber's done a fantastic job with WFRC. I've spent a lot of time working with him and seeing what they're doing. Take the time, the resources are there. If we need to provide more resources as a state to help you do that planning and think regionally, we will do it. And I think that's truly the best way we can do it. We empower the cities and the local governments to make the good decisions. We do what Senator Fillmore was talking about and incentivize, give the right incentives to make it worthwhile for the cities to look at, and then give you the tools that you need to be successful. And I think that's the number one thing we can do going forward as a state. To deal with our challenges and to provide options for our kids and our grandkids and keep them here in Utah.
Terrific. Well, the good news is, from a local government perspective, we've permitted more housing units in the last 3 years than any time in state history. We're working through MPOs. That's why we have this session. It started with Andrew Gruber, and we have a spirit of collaboration here, which helps us tackle these tough challenges, which doesn't really exist in other states. So thank you for your time today, and please join me in thanking the panel for joining us today.